Heat radiated from the asphalt the day my parents handed my future to a stranger. They called her their miracle. I called her the reason I died with $20 to my name. Second chances rarely smell like cheap hospital bleach and burnt toast, but waking up at 18 was a bitter kind of magic. This time, I didn't scream. I smiled, handed over my college acceptance, and let them ruin themselves. Welcome to my favorite tragedy. Coffee scorched the back of my throat, a sharp, acidic burn that grounded me in the impossible. The yellowed floral wallpaper of the kitchen clawed at my peripheral vision. The hum of the dying refrigerator vibrated through the soles of my cheap canvas sneakers. It was real. The calendar on the wall, stained with grease from 1,000 cheap dinners, screamed July 12th. I was 18 again. My fingers traced the sticky residue on the faux wood table. A faint, involuntary tremor traveled up my wrist. Just minutes ago, or perhaps a lifetime ago, I had been bleeding out on a slick, rain-soaked highway. I could still recall the exact metallic taste of copper flooding my mouth, the agonizing pressure in my chest, and the blinding glare of a semi-truck's headlights as my lungs collapsed. I had died cold alone and entirely broken. All because of the conversation about to happen at this exact table. Footsteps scuffed against the worn linoleum. My father Robert walked in. His shoulders carried the permanent slump of a man who worked too many hours for too little pay, but his eyes held a nervous, defensive glint. Following closely behind him was my mother Diane, her hands wringing a dish towel like she was trying to strangle it. And then came Mia. Mia Stewart wasn't blood. She was the daughter of my mother's late best friend taken in by my parents 3 years ago. From the moment she crossed our threshold, clutching a worn duffel bag and staring at the floor through wide, tear-filled eyes, she became the center of their universe. She was fragile. She was a survivor. She was their lucky girl, the delicate flower they needed to protect. Standing in stark contrast to me, the loud independent, rough-around-the-edges daughter who never seemed to need their help. Mia slid into the chair opposite mine. She wore one of my old, oversized sweaters, the sleeves pulled down over her hands to make her look smaller. The faint, sweet scent of her vanilla body mist clashed with the stale nicotine clinging to my father's flannel. Robert cleared his throat. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet kitchen. Charlene. He started his voice adopting that forced, gentle tone he reserved for bad news. Your mother and I have been talking. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes fixed on the black surface of my coffee. In my previous life, I had leaned in, eager, assuming he was going to congratulate me on the acceptance letter sitting upstairs. The letter from Hawthorne University. The one I had bled over for 4 years. It's about college. Diane chimed in, her voice unnaturally bright. Mia got her placement results back. I didn't do very well, Mia whispered, shrinking into the chair. Her bottom lip trembled right on cue. I'm so sorry, Uncle Robert. I'm not smart like Charlene. Don't say that, sweetie, Diane cooed, reaching out to stroke Mia's hair. You've been through so much trauma. Nobody expects you to be perfect. Robert shifted his weight, the chair groaning in protest. The thing is, Charlene Mia needs a fresh start, a good environment. She's been accepted into the liberal arts program at the state college, but... He swallowed hard, finally forcing himself to meet my gaze. They didn't give her any financial aid, and with her anxiety she really needs to stay in the dorms. She needs the full experience to heal. I knew exactly what was coming. The memory of my past life rushed at me with the force of a physical blow. In that life, I had screamed. I had thrown my mug against the wall, watching the ceramic shatter. I had called Mia a parasite. My father had stood up, his face twisted in rage, and slapped me so hard my vision swam. Selfish, they had called me. Cruel. They drained the college fund, the one I had contributed to with my own part-time jobs, and handed it to Mia. Without the money. I lost my spot at Hawthorne. I ended up working triple shifts at a diner, spiraling into a depression that eventually led me to that rainy, fatal stretch of asphalt. "We need the college fund, Charlene," Robert said, his words rushing out, now eager to get the execution over with. "All of it. We're transferring your tuition savings to Mia's account. You're strong. You're brilliant. You can take a gap year, work a little. Maybe go to community college next fall. You'll be fine. You always are. But Mia will drown without this." Silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I could hear the erratic ticking of the wall clock. I could hear Diane's shallow breathing. I could see Mia peeking at me through her eyelashes, bracing for the explosion. She wanted the explosion. She wanted me to scream, so she could cry, so my parents would comfort her, so she could take my future while playing the victim. I looked at my father. I really looked at him. I saw the exhaustion in his face, the grey creeping into his hair. I felt a sudden hollow ache in my chest. I didn't feel like a mastermind. I just felt like an orphan sitting at a table with people who were supposed to love me. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. It was entirely cold now. "Okay." The word dropped onto the table like a lead weight. Robert blinked, his mouth falling open slightly. "What?" "Okay." I repeated, my voice steady, stripped of any inflection. "You can have it." Diane's grip on the dish towel loosened. "Charlene, really, just like that?" "Yes," I said, setting the mug down with a soft clink. "If Mia needs it to heal, she should have it. I'll figure something else out." Mia's head snapped up. Her performance faltered for a fraction of a second, revealing a flash of sheer confusion before the mask slipped back into place. "Charlene, no," she stammered, forcing a tear to spill over her lower lash line. "I couldn't possibly take your dream away. I'll get a job. I'll work at the grocery store." "It's fine, Mia," I replied, standing up. The chair scraped against the linoleum. I didn't look back as I walked toward the hallway. "You earned it." I made it up the stairs and into my cramped bedroom before my knees gave out. I sank onto the carpet, pressing my hands over my mouth to stifle the ragged, ugly sound clawing its way out of my throat. I wasn't crying because I had lost the money. I was crying because accepting their betrayal hurt infinitely more than fighting it. But as the tears soaked into my palms, a cold, hard knot of resolve tightened in my stomach. They thought I was surrendering. They had no idea I was just cutting the dead weight. Pen ink bled into the cheap, porous paper of the bank withdrawal slip. The lobby of the First National branch smelled overwhelmingly of floor wax and stale air conditioning. Beside me, Diane hovered, her presence a stifling cloud of nervous energy. She kept adjusting the collar of her blouse, casting sideways glances at me, as if she expected me to suddenly snatch the pen and run screaming from the building. "Sign right there on the bottom line, sweetie," the teller said, popping a bubble of pink gum. She didn't care that I was signing away 18 years of my life. To her, it was just another Tuesday. I pressed the tip of the ballpoint pen to the paper. My hand was remarkably steady. Charlene Elizabeth Bennett. In my previous life, the money in this joint account, roughly $40,000 stitched together from my grandparents' inheritances, my parents' meager savings, and my own tips from the diner, had been the tether holding me hostage. When they drained it, they left me with nothing but a bitter sense of entitlement to a life I could no longer afford. "There," I said, pushing the slip across the counter. Diane exhaled a massive, shuddering breath. "Thank you, Charlene," she whispered, placing a hesitant hand on my shoulder. "You have no idea what this means for our family. For Mia." "I know exactly what it means," I replied, shrugging off her touch under the guise of grabbing my purse. The heat hit us like a physical wall the moment we stepped out of the air-conditioned bank. July in this town was unforgiving. The air was thick, tasting of exhaust fumes and baked concrete. We walked in silence to my beat-up Honda Civic. The vinyl seats burned through the thin fabric of my shorts, a sharp sting that reminded me I was alive. "I need to stop by the library," I told Diane as I started the engine. The car roared to life, the muffler rattling violently beneath us. "Can you find a ride home from there?" "Oh," Diane blinked, clearly taken aback. Usually I was expected to chauffeur her wherever she needed. "I suppose I can call your father. What do you need at the library?" "Job applications," I lied smoothly. "Since I'm taking a gap year, I need to find full-time work." Guilt flickered across her features, fast and ugly. "Right. Good idea, honey. You've always been so responsible." I dropped her off at the curb outside the brick library building and drove straight to the back of the parking lot, parking under the meager shade of a dying oak tree. I killed the engine and rested my forehead against the steering wheel. Nausea rolled through me, thick and sudden. I opened the door and retched dryly onto the asphalt, my body physically rejecting the adrenaline that had been keeping me upright. It was messy. It was pathetic. I wiped my mouth with the back of a trembling hand, staring at the grease stains on the pavement. I wasn't a hero. I was a terrified teenager gambling with a second chance at life. But the panic eventually subsided, replaced by the chilling clarity of survival. I went inside the library. The familiar scent of old dust and binding glue settled my nerves. I found an empty computer terminal in the back corner and pulled up the Hawthorne University financial aid portal. Hawthorne was a private elite institution. In my past life, I had qualified for admission, but their financial aid package required a hefty expected family contribution, exactly the amount that had been sitting in the bank account I'd just signed away. Without it, I couldn't go, but I had spent the last agonizing years of my previous life reading about financial loopholes, obsessing over how I could have saved myself. There was a clause, an exception. Hawthorne offered a full-ride, need-based scholarship to a select number of independent students. But to be classified as independent at 18, you couldn't just have poor parents. You had to be legally severed from them, financially entirely unsupported. I opened a new tab and downloaded a standardized Declaration of Financial Independence and Severance of Support form. It was a brutal legal document. By signing it, a parent formally abdicated all financial responsibility for their child. It meant I couldn't be claimed on their taxes. It meant I was a ghost to them on paper. I printed it out. The printer ground out the pages with a mechanical screeching rhythm. That evening, the house smelled of fried chicken and celebration. Mia was sitting on the living room floor surrounded by glossy college catalogues, pointing excitedly at dorm room layouts, while Robert laughed. It was a picture-perfect family moment. I stood in the doorway, a ghost haunting my own home. "Dad," I interrupted, my voice flat. Robert looked up, his smile faltering. "Hey, kiddo, what's up?" I walked over and dropped the printed forms onto the coffee table, right on top of a brochure for expensive twin XL bedding. "The bank teller told me we need these signed." Robert frowned, picking up the top sheet. "What is this?" "Tax waivers," I said, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Since the money was transferred to Mia, the IRS might view it as an untaxed gift. The teller said that since I'm 18, you need to sign this declaring that I am no longer a financial dependent, otherwise you'll be hit with a massive tax penalty at the end of the year. It was a complete fabrication, a lie built on my father's deep-seated terror of the IRS and his utter lack of financial literacy. Robert squinted at the dense legal jargon. He hated reading paperwork. He always had. "Severance of support," he muttered, reading a bolded header. "Charlene, this says we aren't paying for your living expenses." "You aren't," I pointed out softly. "You gave the money to Mia. This just makes it legal so you don't get fined." "Oh, right." He rubbed the back of his neck, looking uncomfortable. He didn't want to think about the reality of what he had done. He just wanted to enjoy the evening. He grabbed a pen from the side table. "Where do I sign?" I pointed to the lines. He scrawled his name 3 times. Diane walked in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. "What are we signing?" "Just some bank stuff." Robert dismissed, tossing the pen down. "Tax things." Diane didn't even look at the papers. "Okay, Charlene, grab some plates. Dinner is ready." I gathered the papers, my fingers gripping the edges so hard the paper crumpled slightly. I had it. I had the keys to my cage. I took the documents upstairs, locked them in my glove compartment, and spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter drifting up through the floorboards. I was entirely alone now. It was the most terrifying, beautiful feeling in the world. August rolled in like a suffocating blanket. The heat wave broke records, turning the town into a slow-moving, sweat-drenched ghost town. I spent my days at a diner off the interstate, picking up every shift the manager would legally allow me to work. My life became a blur of sensory exhaustion. The smell of old fryer grease permeated my skin, clinging to the roots of my hair, no matter how many times I showered. My calves ached with a dull, throbbing persistence from standing on cracked tile floors for 12 hours a day. But every clinking quarter left on a sticky table was mine. I hoarded cash in a shoebox beneath the floorboard of my car, saving for the Greyhound ticket I would need to get across the country. At home, the atmosphere was a bizarre, toxic mix of jubilation and complete avoidance. Mia's college preparations had taken over the house. The cramped hallway constantly smelled of the expensive lavender detergent she insisted on using for her new clothes. Every day a new delivery box arrived on the porch. High-end laptop, noise-cancelling headphones, a miniature espresso machine for her dorm. The crinkle of boutique shopping bags became the soundtrack of my evenings. She was spending the money. My money. One evening I came home from a double shift, the grease under my fingernails making me feel filthy and raw. The living room looked like a retail explosion. Diane was kneeling on the floor, carefully wrapping a delicate glass lamp in bubble wrap. "Oh, Charlene, be careful where you step," Diane warned, not looking up. "Mia's new monitor is right there. We don't want it scratched." I stepped over the sleek silver box. Right. Mia was draped over the armchair, scrolling through her phone. She looked up, her eyes flicking over my stained uniform. A subtle, almost imperceptible smirk tugged at the corner of her mouth. "You look exhausted, Charlene." "Rough shift." "Something like that," I muttered, heading for the stairs. "I was just telling Aunt Diane." Mia continued, her voice raising a fraction so it echoed in the stairwell. "I feel so guilty buying all this, but my therapist said it's crucial I have a comfortable aesthetic environment to manage my anxiety. I wish you could experience dorm shopping, Charlene. Maybe next year when you save up enough at the diner." It was a masterful dig, covered in sugar laced with poison. In my past life I would have snapped. I would have screamed that she was a thief. But now, looking down at her perfectly manicured nails and her smug, innocent eyes, I felt nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. "I'm glad you're getting what you need, Mia," I said, my voice deadpan. I walked upstairs and closed my door. The silence of my room pressed against my eardrums. My walls were already bare. Over the past 3 weeks I had been quietly selling off anything of value I owned. My guitar, my collection of vinyl records, even my prom dress. The only things left were clothes shoved into black industrial trash bags hidden in the trunk of my Civic. I sat on my stripped mattress. The physical reality of my departure was settling heavily onto my shoulders. I was leaving in 4 days. I hadn't told them. I hadn't mentioned that Hawthorne had accepted my independent status, waiving my tuition entirely, or that they had fast-tracked my housing application, securing me a spot in a subsidized campus apartment. Downstairs, I could hear Diane laughing. She was planning a massive going-away party for Mia. The guest list was apparently massive neighbors, extended family, everyone my parents wanted to impress with their charity case turned success story. I pulled my knees to my chest, burying my face in my arms. A sudden violent sob racked my frame. I hated that it still hurt. I hated that after everything, after dying, after being reborn, after securing my future, I still desperately wanted my mother to walk upstairs and ask how my day was. I wanted my father to look at me with the pride he reserved for a stranger. The grief was a living, breathing thing inside me, tearing at my insides with ragged claws. I cried until my throat was raw, my tears soaking into the cheap denim of my uniform. It was an ugly, imperfect breakdown born of pure survivor's guilt and profound loneliness. But when the tears finally stopped, I wiped my face with a rough hand. Crying wouldn't save me. 3 days later, the house was chaotic. The party was in full swing in the backyard. The smell of barbecue smoke and cheap beer wafted through the open windows. I stood in my empty bedroom, wearing a clean t-shirt and jeans. My car was packed. The keys were heavy in my pocket. I walked downstairs. No one noticed me slip through the kitchen. Through the window, I saw Robert toasting Mia, who was blushing and looking demure in a new sundress. Diane was beaming, holding a tray of appetizers. I picked up a pen from the kitchen counter. I found a blank receipt from the diner in my pocket. I'm leaving. Don't look for me. Charlene. I left the note on the counter right next to the empty coffee pot. I walked out the front door, the heat immediately wrapping around me. The cicadas were screaming their shrill, aggressive song. I got into my Civic, the sticky vinyl welcoming me like an old friend. I turned the key. The engine sputtered, then caught. I didn't look in the rearview mirror as I pulled out of the driveway. I drove toward the interstate, the setting sun painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and gold. Enrollment day was exactly 1 week away, and I couldn't wait for the dust to settle. Tires hummed a monotonous, vibrating rhythm against the cracked asphalt of Interstate 95. Rain started falling somewhere past the state line fat drops, smearing across the windshield faster than my worn wiper blades could clear them. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel. Every muscle in my back felt like a tightly coiled wire, bracing for a phone call that wasn't coming. Hawthorne University looked exactly like the brochures, which somehow made it vastly more intimidating. Gothic stone architecture loomed against the grey sky, thick vines of ivy clinging to the brickwork like desperate fingers. I parked my rattling Civic in the farthest lot of the subsidized housing block. The engine ticked loudly as it cooled, a stark contrast to the quiet hum of the luxury SUVs unloading fresh-faced freshmen a few blocks over. My apartment was a cramped studio on the 4th floor of a building that smelled permanently of boiled cabbage and industrial pine cleaner. There was a single window overlooking a brick alleyway. The bed was a metal frame holding a twin mattress encased in thick, crinkling blue plastic. I dropped my garbage bags full of clothes onto the scuffed linoleum floor. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy and crushing. I sat down on the blue plastic. It groaned underneath my weight. Pulling a jar of cheap peanut butter from my backpack, I ate a spoonful straight from the plastic container, the thick mass sticking to the roof of my mouth. I checked my bank account app on my phone with a cracked screen. $314. That was my entire net worth. I waited for the grief to hit. I waited for the panic of what I had done to paralyze me. But mostly I just felt a hollow, expansive ache. For the first 12 days, my phone was completely dead. Not a single text, not a missed call. Diane didn't ask if I was eating. Robert didn't ask if the car broke down. They had walked into the kitchen, found my note next to the coffee pot, and simply accepted my absence as a convenient solution to their problem. They didn't have to look at the daughter they had robbed anymore. The realization tasted like ash. It hurt far worse than the slap Robert had given me in my past life. A slap was an acknowledgement of my existence. This profound, echoing silence was erasure. I threw myself into the brutal mechanics of survival. I navigated the labyrinth of Hawthorne's financial aid office, signing stacks of paperwork, that legally cemented my status as a ward of no one. My tuition was zeroed out. My meal plan was subsidized. I got a job stocking shelves at the campus bookstore from midnight to 6 in the morning, hauling heavy boxes of overpriced textbooks that smelled of fresh ink and shrink wrap. By the time orientation week ended, the skin under my eyes was bruised purple with exhaustion. I smelled like cardboard dust and stale coffee. But the anxiety in my chest had hardened into something sharp and useful. I was untouchable. Then, on the Tuesday morning before classes officially began, my phone vibrated against the metal bedside table. The sudden buzzing sounded like a chainsaw in the quiet room. I stared at the screen. Dad, cell. My stomach plummeted, a sickening rush of adrenaline flooding my veins. The phone stopped. Then it started again. Dad, cell. I didn't answer. I swiped the phone to silent and shoved it under my pillow. Whatever fuse had finally blown back home, it wasn't my problem anymore. I had a 9 a.m. appointment at the registrar's office to pick up my student ID and finalize my class schedule. I washed my face with cold water, the freezing temperature shocking my system awake. I pulled on a clean, faded band t-shirt and a pair of jeans, tying my damp hair into a severe knot at the back of my neck. I wasn't the girl who died on that rainy highway anymore. I was a ghost they created, and ghosts don't answer to the living. Polished oak floors squeaked beneath the soles of my sneakers. The Hawthorne registrar's office was a cavernous room with vaulted ceilings and stained glass windows that cast long, colorful shadows across the rows of waiting students. The air conditioning was aggressive, biting through the thin cotton of my shirt. It smelled of expensive perfume, freshly printed paper, and old money. I stood in the financial clearance line, gripping my printed housing contract. There were maybe a dozen students ahead of me, chatting casually about their summer trips to Europe or complaining about their dorm assignments. Charlene. The voice ripped through the low hum of conversation like a jagged knife. I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up. It wasn't possible. The campus was 4 hours away from my hometown. I turned around slowly. Standing 10 feet away, dripping with sweat and looking entirely out of place among the pristine architecture, was Robert. His face was flushed a violent mottled red. Beside him stood Diane, her eyes wide and frantic, clutching a leather purse tight against her chest. And trailing slightly behind them, looking like she was walking to her own execution, was Mia. Mia was wearing a designer silk blouse and a pair of pristine cream-colored trousers. She held a brand-new iced matcha latte from an expensive off-campus cafe, the condensation dripping down her knuckles. But her face was ashen. The delicate, victimized mask she usually wore had completely shattered, replaced by genuine naked terror. "I knew it!" Robert hissed, closing the distance between us in 3 large, aggressive strides. People in the line turned to stare, their conversations dying out instantly. "Your mother found the Hawthorne search history on the family computer. What the hell do you think you're doing here?" "I go to school here," I said, keeping my voice dangerously low. "Keep your voice down." "Keep my voice down!" Robert barked, his volume rising. A woman behind the mahogany counter frowned, picking up a desk phone. "Do you have any idea what you've done, you little thief? You sabotaged your sister." I let out a harsh, involuntary laugh. The metallic taste of adrenaline was sharp on my tongue. "Sabotaged?" Diane stepped forward, tears already spilling down her cheeks. "Charlene, please. You have to fix this. Mia's enrollment was today. We drove her to the state college this morning. When we went to the bursar's office to pay her tuition, her card declined." I looked at Mia. She shrank back, her manicured nails digging into the plastic cup of her latte. "Declined?" I echoed, feigning confusion. "How there was $40,000 in that account?" "We don't know," Robert shouted, a vein throbbing prominently in his forehead. "The bank said the account only has $300 left. The state college cancelled her classes. They wouldn't even let her move her things into the dorm. They kicked her out on the sidewalk. I shifted my gaze back to Mia. I stared at her expensive clothes. I thought about the noise-cancelling headphones, the boutique shopping bags, the miniature espresso machine. The truth was glaringly obvious, but my parents were too deeply in denial to see it. They thought $40,000 was an infinite sum. They thought Mia was a delicate angel. They never once checked the balance while she was swiping that debit card across town. Sounds like a personal problem, I said, turning my back on them. Robert grabbed my shoulder, his grip painfully tight. You listen to me. We are tapped out. The credit cards are maxed. I know you're hoarding your tuition money here. Hawthorne is $70,000 a year. You are going to march up to that desk, withdraw from this school, and request a full refund. You are going to transfer that money to Mia right now, or I swear to God. I wrenched my shoulder out of his grasp with such force that he stumbled forward. Don't touch me. The quiet of the registrar's office was absolute now. Every eye in the room was fixed on us. There is no refund, Robert, I said, dropping the title Dad for the first time in my life. The syllables felt incredibly liberating. Stop lying, he yelled, spit flying from his lips. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. An older man in a sharp suit said, stepping out from behind the mahogany counter. His name tag read, Dean of Admissions. This is a private institution, and you are causing a disturbance. I am her father. Robert snarled, pointing a shaking finger at me. I demand to see her financial accounts. I want her tuition refunded to my bank immediately. The dean adjusted his glasses, looking from Robert's flushed, furious face to my calm, cold demeanor. Are you Charlene Bennett? Yes, I replied. The dean tapped a few keys on a tablet he was holding. He frowned, looking back up at Robert. Sir, you have no legal standing to make any demands regarding Ms. Bennett's account, and even if you did, there is no money to refund. Diane gasped, stepping forward. What do you mean there's no money she's enrolled? Ms. Bennett is attending Hawthorne on a full need-based grant. The dean explained, his tone laced with a distinct, icy condescension. She applied as a legally independent student with zero family contribution. Her tuition is covered by an institutional endowment which is non-transferable and non-refundable. She didn't pay us a dime. The color drained entirely from Robert's face. He looked like he had been struck with a baseball bat. Legally independent. What are you talking about? The tax waiver you signed in July. I said quietly, the words dropping like stones into the dead silence of the room. It wasn't for taxes. It was a declaration of financial severance. You legally disowned me financially. That piece of paper is what got me the grant. Diane let out a choked, wet noise, clapping her hands over her mouth. You... Robert stammered, the rage giving way to sheer, unadulterated panic. He looked at Mia, then back at me. But the state college... Mia needs $18,000 by 5 o'clock today, or she loses her spot entirely. Charlene, you have to take out a student loan. You're at a prestigious school, they'll approve you. You have to co-sign for her. I looked at the three of them. My father begging me to go into debt for the girl who stole my future. My mother sobbing into her hands. And Mia, the lucky girl, standing in her expensive silk shirt, with nothing but empty pockets and a ruined enrollment day. I'm legally independent. I reminded him, a slow, dark smile creeping onto my face despite myself. I have no family, and I definitely don't have a sister. I turned around and handed my paperwork to the stunned teller at the desk. Behind me, the sound of Mia finally dropping her iced latte onto the polished oak floor echoed like a gunshot. Autumn stripped the Hawthorne campus of its welcoming green facade, leaving behind skeletal trees and a biting wind that cut straight through my thin thrift store coat. The adrenaline that had sustained me through August evaporated by late October, replaced by a bone-deep, persistent exhaustion. Survival, it turned out, was incredibly boring. My alarm went off at 3:30 a.m. every morning. The sound was a harsh, synthetic trill that always made my heart stutter. I would drag myself off the crinkling blue plastic mattress, the apartment freezing because the radiator only hissed lukewarm air between the hours of noon and 4. I lived on instant oatmeal made with tap water and whatever expired sandwiches the campus bookstore manager let me take home after my shifts. I didn't make friends. I didn't have the bandwidth. While the girls in my Western civilization seminar complained about their sorority rush outfits smelling like cheap perfume, I sat in the back row, rubbing the lingering scent of cardboard dust and packing tape out of my cuticles. Thanksgiving break was a quiet kind of torture. The campus emptied out in a matter of hours, a mass exodus of rolling suitcases and idling luxury cars. I stayed behind picking up extra shifts, deep cleaning the library stacks. The silence in the cavernous empty buildings was heavy enough to crack ribs. On the Tuesday before the holiday, I found a pale pink envelope wedged inside my tiny subsidized mailbox. The handwriting was unmistakably Diane's, a loopy, overly stylized cursive that used to spell out my name on birthday cards. Now it just looked frantic. The return address was our old house. I stood in the drafty mailroom, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like trapped hornets. My thumb traced the edge of the paper. It was thick, expensive stationery. A sharp phantom pain flared behind my ribs. The broken, pathetic part of my brain, the child that still existed somewhere beneath the calluses, whispered that maybe it was an apology. Maybe they had realized the house was too quiet without me. Maybe Robert missed my loud music. I walked out to the dumpsters behind the dining hall. The air smelled of rotting lettuce and cold asphalt. I ripped the envelope in half without opening it, then in quarters. I dropped the confetti into the dark, foul-smelling maw of the dumpster and watched it land on a crushed milk carton. My hands were shaking as I walked back to my apartment. I hated myself for the tremor. I hated that I still cared enough to feel the sting of what might have been inside that letter. But as I unlocked my door and stepped into the quiet, ugly little room that belonged entirely to me, the shaking stopped. I made a cup of cheap black tea, sat at my wobbly desk, and opened my biology textbook. The words blurred for a moment, but I forced my eyes to focus. I wasn't going backward, not for a piece of pink paper. The real world kept spinning indifferent to the drama of the Bennett family. By December, I had secured a 3.9 GPA, fueled almost entirely by caffeine and spite. My professors didn't know my story. They just knew I was the girl who sat in the front row, handed in assignments 3 days early, and never stayed for office hours banter. One evening during a brutal sleet storm, I was shelving the last of the incoming spring semester textbooks. The bookstore was empty, save for me and the manager, a gruff, tired woman named Sarah, who smelled perpetually of peppermint gum. "Bennett?" she called out from the register, her voice cutting through the hum of the heater. I wiped a streak of dust from my forehead with the back of my wrist. "Yeah. Phone for you. Line 2. I froze a stack of heavy chemistry volumes balanced against my chest. Nobody called me at work. Nobody even knew I worked here except for the university payroll department. I set the books down on a rolling cart. The heavy thud echoed in the quiet store. I walked over to the counter, my boots squeaking against the wet linoleum. I picked up the heavy black receiver. "Hello. Charlene." The voice was thin, reedy, and laced with a desperate, cloying sweetness. "Mia." My grip on the plastic receiver tightened until my knuckles ached. "How did you get this number?" "I called the registrar." She said, her breath hitching in that practiced, helpless way. "I told them I was your sister, and there was a family emergency. They told me where you worked." I closed my eyes. The sheer audacity of her entitlement was staggering. "There is no family emergency, Mia. Do not call this number again." "Wait, Charlene, please don't hang up." The mask slipped under the panic bleeding through the receiver. "You have to help me. Uncle Robert, he lost his job. I opened my eyes, staring at the rack of brightly colored highlighters on the counter. I don't care. He got fired. She rushed on, ignoring me. He missed too many days because he was trying to sort out my tuition situation. The state college sent my bill to collections. They're going to sue us, Charlene. They're going to take the house. Then you should probably start packing. How can you be so cold? She sobbed, the sound wet and ugly over the line. We're your family. Aunt Diane is having panic attacks every night. I had to sell my laptop. I have to work at the grocery store, Charlene. It's humiliating. People from high school see me bagging their produce. A dark, vicious amusement curled in the pit of my stomach. She was finally experiencing the life they had meticulously planned for me. Sounds like character building, I said smoothly. Maybe your therapist can help you find a comfortable aesthetic way to scan barcodes. You have a full ride. Mia hissed, her tone shifting from pleading to pure venomous resentment. You have free housing. You stole that from me. If you hadn't manipulated that paperwork, Uncle Robert would have paid for me. You owe us. Take out a loan, Charlene. Send us $5,000 just to get the collectors off our backs. Goodbye, Mia. If you hang up, I swear to God. I placed the receiver back on the cradle with a soft, definitive click. The silence in the bookstore rushed back in. Sarah was watching me from over the top of her reading glasses. She popped a bubble of peppermint gum. Everything okay, kid? Perfect item, I said, turning back towards the textbook aisles. Just a wrong number. February brought a brutal freeze that encased the Hawthorne campus in a thick layer of dirty, unyielding ice. The novelty of college life had long since worn off for the student body. The dining halls were quieter, the library was packed with stressed, sleep-deprived students, and the air was thick with mid-term anxiety. I thrived in the misery. The colder it got, the sharper I felt. I had picked up a second job tutoring underclassmen in calculus, padding my shoebox of cash with $20 bills. I was saving for a security deposit on an off-campus apartment for sophomore year. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The sky outside the library windows was the color of a bruised plum. I was sitting at a corner table, chewing on the end of a blue pen halfway through a complex statistical analysis paper, when my phone vibrated against the wood. It was a notification from a free credit monitoring app I had downloaded months ago. Alert new inquiry on your Equifax report. I stopped chewing. A cold, heavy stone dropped into my stomach. I opened the app, the glaring white screen burning my tired eyes. Application for Credit Capital One Platinum MasterCard. Status pending. I stared at the screen, my vision tunneling. I hadn't applied for a credit card. I didn't even have a credit score yet. I tapped the Details tab. The application had been submitted less than 20 minutes ago. The listed address was my parents' house. The air in my lungs turned to shards of glass. They weren't just desperate anymore. They were criminal. They had my social security number memorized, or they had dug out my old birth certificate from a filing cabinet. They were trying to open a line of credit in my name to save themselves from the financial crater they had dug. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel betrayed. I felt a surge of absolute predatory rage. It tasted like copper and adrenaline, familiar and intoxicating. I shoved my laptop into my backpack, the zipper screaming against the quiet hum of the library. I practically ran out of the building, my boots slipping on the icy pavement. The winter wind whipped my hair into my eyes, stinging my cheeks, but I didn't feel the cold. I reached my apartment, locked the door behind me, and pulled my laptop back out. It took me 4 minutes to navigate to the Equifax website. It took another 3 minutes to place a hard, impenetrable freeze on my credit file. The application would bounce. They wouldn't get a dime. But a block wasn't enough. A block was defensive. I needed to burn the bridge entirely to the ground. I picked up my phone and dialed the number I had spent the last 8 months trying to forget. It rang 3 times. Hello. Robert's voice was different. The arrogant, dismissive edge was gone, replaced by a raspy, hollow exhaustion. He sounded 10 years older. "Cancel the application." I said, my voice dead flat, devoid of any inflection. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. A long, agonizing pause followed, filled only by the faint, static hum of the connection. Charlene. Capital 1. I continued staring blankly at the peeling paint on my radiator. "You used my social security number. You applied 20 minutes ago." Charlene listened to me. Robert stammered his words, tumbling over each other in a panicked rush. We made a mistake. A big mistake. We're drowning here, kid. The mortgage company sent a notice of foreclosure. Diane can't stop crying. Mia moved out. She went to live with some guy she met at the grocery store. She took the car. She just left us. I closed my eyes. The mental image of Mia, the lucky girl, the fragile flower abandoning a sinking ship the moment the money dried up, was almost poetic. It was exactly what I had known she would do. "I don't care, Robert." "Don't call me that," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "I'm your dad. Please. I just needed a bridge loan. $5,000 to keep the house. I was going to pay it back, I swear to God. You have perfect credit, it wouldn't have hurt you. Identity theft is a federal crime." I said the words slicing through his pathetic justifications like a scalpel. "You wouldn't—" He whispered, the reality of the situation finally dawning on him. "You wouldn't do that to your own father. We raised you. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. And then you handed my future to a parasite because it made you feel like a savior." I replied, my voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper. "Listen to me very carefully, Robert. I have frozen my credit. The application will be denied. If you, Diane, or anyone else attempts to use my name, my social security number, or my likeness ever again, I will not call you. I will call the police. I will hand them the IP address, logs, the time stamps, and I will press maximum charges. You will lose the house, and then you will go to prison. Charlene, please. You chose your daughter in July." I said, the finality of the words settling deep into my bones, heavy and permanent. "Now you get to live with her." I ended the call. I didn't block the number. I wanted to see if he would try to call back. I sat on the edge of the blue plastic mattress and watched the screen of my phone. The minutes ticked by in total, absolute silence. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20. The screen remained black. I let out a long, slow breath, watching the faint plume of white condensation it formed in the cold room. My chest felt incredibly light. The ghost town was finally truly empty. I stood up, walked over to my desk, and opened my calculus textbook. I had a tutoring session at 5, and I was going to be perfectly on time. Spring of my junior year arrived with a suffocating wet humidity that clung to the Hawthorne campus like a second skin. By then I had moved out of the subsidized dorms and into a basement apartment 3 miles off campus. It smelled permanently of damp concrete and laundry detergent, but it had a deadbolt that locked with a satisfying heavy thud. I had traded the bookstore night shifts for a paid accounting internship at a downtown firm, a position secured through sheer, unlikable persistence. My wardrobe consisted of 4 thrifted blazers, painstakingly ironed every Sunday night on a towel spread across my kitchen counter. Tuesday mornings were for black coffee and statistical analysis. I was running late. The bus had broken down 2 blocks from the firm, forcing me to walk through a sudden, miserable downpour. Water seeped through the worn soles of my loafers. The squelching sound with every step was a rhythmic reminder of how thin the margin of error still was in my life. Desperate to dry off before walking into the sterile glass-walled lobby of the firm, I ducked into a narrow, dimly lit diner on 4th Street. The bell above the door jingled a flat, rusty note. The air inside hit me like a physical wall, a greasy, heavy concoction of burnt hash browns, stale coffee and old frying oil. It was a smell I knew intimately in my bones. It was the smell of the life I had escaped. "Sit anywhere," a voice called out over the hiss of the grill. My chest tightened. The voice was flat, robbed of its musical cadence, but the underlying pitch was unmistakable. I wiped the rain from my eyes and looked towards the counter. Standing behind the scratched Formica, wearing a dull brown uniform that was a size too big and stained with dried ketchup, was Mia. Her hair, once meticulously highlighted and curled, was dragged back into a messy, unwashed knot. The expensive manicures were gone, replaced by ragged, bitten fingernails. She was holding a damp rag, staring blankly at the digital cash register. When she finally looked up to see who had walked in, the color drained completely from her face. For 10 agonizing seconds, neither of us moved. The only sound was the rhythmic drip of water falling from my soaked blazer onto the cracked linoleum floor. I didn't feel a triumphant surge of vindication. I didn't feel the burning satisfaction of karma. I just felt a deep, hollow exhaustion. Looking at her was like looking into a dirty mirror reflecting the ghost of my previous life. This was the exact diner uniform I had worn before the semi-truck ended me. The universe, it seemed, had a deeply cynical sense of humor. Mia's hand trembled slightly, the damp rag slipping from her fingers to land with a wet slap on the counter. "Charlene." Her voice was barely a whisper. It wasn't a greeting. It was an accusation laced with a raw, undeniable shame. "I need a black coffee." I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I walked over to the counter, pulling a crumpled $5 bill from my damp pocket. "To go." Mia didn't move toward the coffee pots. She just stared at me. Her eyes dragged over my crisp, albeit wet blazer, my structured leather briefcase, and the hard, unyielding set of my jaw. "You're here, in the city. Hawthorne isn't that far away," I replied, smoothing out the $5 bill on the counter. "Coffee, Mia. I have an internship." A bitter, ugly laugh tore its way out of her throat. It sounded like scraping metal. "An internship? Of course you do. You took everything and now you have an internship." I let out a slow breath, the smell of grease making my stomach turn. "I didn't take anything. You took the college fund. You took the car. You took the easy way out. I'm just drinking the water from the well you poisoned." "They lost the house," she blurted out, her eyes filling with frantic, exhausted tears. She leaned over the counter, desperate for me to care. "Uncle Robert is living in a motel by the interstate. Aunt Diane is staying on a friend's couch. They have nothing." "And where are you living?" I asked, my gaze dropping to the dark, bruised bags under her eyes. Mia swallowed hard, looking away. "With a guy. He pays the rent. Usually, if he's in a good mood." The implication hung in the air, heavy and toxic. She had traded one parasitic existence for another, clinging to whatever lifeline would keep her from having to save herself. She was exactly who she had always been, just stripped of the expensive packaging my parents had bought her. "That's unfortunate," I said. It was the absolute truth. It was a pathetic, tragic waste of 3 lives. But it wasn't my tragedy anymore. I reached across the counter, grabbed a paper cup, and poured the coffee myself from the glass carafe. The hot liquid splashed against my wrist, a sharp, grounding burn. I put a plastic lid on the cup, leaving the $5 bill on the Formica. "Keep the change," I said, turning my back to her. "I hate you." Mia whispered, the venom finally breaking through the desperation. It echoed in the empty diner, a pathetic curse from a girl drowning in a puddle. I pushed the heavy glass door open, stepping back out into the freezing rain. The damp cold immediately soaked through my clothes, making me shiver violently. I didn't look back through the window. I took a sip of the bitter, scalding coffee, adjusted my grip on my briefcase, and walked toward the glass-fronted financial building, towering at the end of the block. I was going to be 5 minutes early. May arrived 2 years later with a brutal, oppressive heat that baked the campus sidewalks. It smelled of cut grass, expensive cigars, and melting asphalt. The graduation gowns were made of cheap, suffocating polyester that trapped the heat against the skin. I stood in the massive alphabetical queue behind the football stadium, sweating profusely, my hands gripping the edge of my unadorned mortarboard. The air was electric with the chaotic, joyful noise of 2,000 students preparing to step into the rest of their lives. Girls were fixing each other's makeup. Guys were taking shaky swigs from hidden flasks. Everyone was scanning the bleachers, pointing out their parents, their grandparents, the massive homemade signs painted with their names. My phone vibrated in the pocket of my dress. A calendar reminder. Payment due. Security deposit, Chicago apartment. I had signed the lease 3 weeks ago. I was starting as a junior analyst at a mid-tier firm in Illinois on Monday. My bank account, once a source of daily grinding panic, now held a comfortable 5-figure cushion built from 3 years of tutoring bookstore shifts and paid internships. The procession line began to move. The brass band struck up Pomp and Circumstance, the heavy notes vibrating in my chest. We marched through the tunnel and out onto the football field. The sunlight was blinding. The roar of the crowd was a physical force, a tidal wave of pride and expectation. I found my seat in the B section. To my left, a girl named Brittany was frantically waving at a block of 10 people in the front row, all wearing matching t-shirts with her face on them. To my right, a guy was quietly crying as he looked toward the handicap-accessible seating. I looked up at the sea of faces. I scanned the general admission bleachers, the rows of folding chairs on the grass. Nothing. There was no one looking for me. No one holding a camera. No one waiting to take me out to an overpriced steakhouse dinner. The space in the universe where my family was supposed to exist was just a cold, vacant void. A sudden, sharp ache seized my throat. It was the same involuntary grief that had dropped me to my knees in my childhood bedroom 4 years ago. I thought I had burned it all out. I thought I had surgically removed the part of me that cared. But standing there, surrounded by the physical manifestation of unconditional love, the isolation was agonizing. I was 22 years old, entirely self-made, and profoundly alone. But as the ceremony dragged on and the afternoon sun began to dip behind the stadium, the ache slowly hardened into a familiar, protective callus. My name was called. Charlene Elizabeth Bennett, summa cum laude. I stood up. My knees didn't shake. I walked up the metal stairs of the stage, the cheap soles of my shoes clicking against the wood. The dean of the business school handed me the leather-bound portfolio. He smiled a practiced, polite expression and shook my hand. "Congratulations." He murmured. "Thank you," I said. I walked across the stage looking out at the thousands of people who didn't know me. I thought about the slick, rain-soaked highway. I thought about the metallic taste of blood and the $20 bill in my pocket when I died. I thought about the yellowed floral wallpaper in my parents' kitchen, the sting of the vinyl car seat, and the crinkling blue plastic of my first mattress. They had handed my life to a stranger. They had expected me to fold to become collateral damage in their twisted narrative of charity and sacrifice. They thought I would drown quietly so they wouldn't have to hear the splashing. I stepped off the stage and walked back to my seat. I opened the leather portfolio. Inside was a heavy piece of cardstock with my name printed in elegant gold foil. It didn't belong to Robert. It didn't belong to Diane. It certainly didn't belong to Mia. It was mine. Every late night, every missed meal, every ounce of exhaustion and panic had bought this piece of paper. The ceremony ended in a chaotic eruption of tossed caps and screaming. I didn't throw my hat. I held it tightly against my chest. I wove through the massive crowds of hugging families, keeping my head down, avoiding the flying elbows and camera flashes. I reached my beat-up Civic, the same rattling machine that had carried me away from my old life parked in the back lot. The interior was sweltering. I tossed the leather portfolio onto the passenger seat next to my packed duffel bags. The trunk was full. The lease was signed. The ghost town was 1,000 miles in the rearview mirror. I turned the key. The engine roared to life, louder and uglier than the luxury cars pulling out of the lot, but it ran. It ran perfectly. I put the car in drive and pulled out onto the main road, the late afternoon sun casting long golden shadows across the asphalt. Second chances rarely look like miracles. Sometimes they look like severed ties, burnt bridges, and the quiet, brutal realization that you are the only one coming to save you. And as I merged onto the interstate heading west, the silence in the car didn't feel heavy anymore. It just felt like freedom. Did I go too far? Maybe. But survival isn't about being the bigger person. It's about making sure you're the last one standing when the fallout hits. If you want to know exactly how Mia's face looked when she tried to swipe that student ID, or how my parents explained their empty bank accounts to the dean, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Part 4 is coming, and trust me, you don't want to miss the absolute meltdown at the registrar's office. Drop a comment below. What would you have done?